All right, I will say good morning, good morning, good morning, a good yar, a piskatava, a good kvittel. Oh, is this not on?
It is on, it's just not, the speaker's not on.
Oh, how is that working?
You can speak it through the base.
Wow. It's like the miracle. I'm like the Baba Sali of speakers, right? Stuff just keeps coming out. All right. All right, I will say, let's begin. Good morning. Begin by thanking all of our sons again. First of all, hopefully everybody had a beautiful, uplifting, meaningful Yom Kippur. Was a schus Baruch Hashem to be able to spend it with all of the chaver here. We had a very special Daf Yomi share yesterday during our break, which was really beautiful and uplifting. I think a great zechus Baruch Hashem to our Rebbe, to the Blina Rav, and Halavai provided a beautiful neshama to his aliyah as well. And Aliyah is Neshama as well. So begin by thanking our sponsors for today. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Tishrei, Jerry and Sarah Wolaski, for dedicating all the children's drushos this month in the Schus for Shlema for their grandson Zechariah Dom and Perel Shira, Shane Dean Avram Kelman in memory of their beloved parents, and the Schus of all those in the for Shlema. Dr. Linda Weinberg in loving memory of her husband Paul, Peretz Moshe ben Avram David, Selma Wolf with immense gratitude to Hashem, and with tefillos for health for all in the new year. Leah Sol is a schos for a shlema for her daughter Ilana Bas Esther, and for all those in need of Yeshuas. And our week of learning sponsors, Jeff Schwartz, in appreciation for the Daf Yomi Shir. Beautiful. Also with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Mem Daled 44. We are picking up. We actually made good ground yesterday. Baruch Hashem. We are picking up 4 lines down from the top on Mem Daled Amud Aleph. I'm not sure why on fast days I'm able to go ahead and actually keep up with the daf, but the rest of the year I can't. All right, but that's a different discussion. One of the mysteries of the universe. I'm sorry? No. That is called fast. All right. Okay. It's my fault. I shouldn't have asked what. Let's say 4 lines down from the top. 44a, 4 lines down. We're supposed to, if you remember again, just to reorient ourselves a little bit. So we are focusing now, interesting at the 2 dots, the bottom 2 dots on Mem Gimel Amadei's 43b. So we were discussing an interesting machlokes about Na'ara HaMe'urasa. So remember again, you have a Na'ara, which is an intriguing stage in a young woman's development, 12 years old to 12 years old in 6 months, where it's a semi-autonomous stage. So on one hand, she has certain rights, personalistic rights, but on the other hand, she is still under the domain and responsibility of her father. So the question is, who has the ability to receive her get, and who has the ability to receive Kiddushin? So when it came to Gittin, we had a machlokes. Tanakama said either she or her father could receive her get. Rabbi Huda said absolutely not. 2 hands, ein shtei yadayim zochos ke'echad. 2 hands cannot acquire as one. Rather, Rabbi Yehuda holds that only her father has the ability to go ahead and receive her get. Rabbi Yochanan came along and said, the machlokes is only by Kiddushin, only by divorce, but by Kiddushin, everyone agrees that only the father has the ability to makabel Kiddushin. So that's the topic that we are in now. That's our subject. So the Gemara says, Elai itmar hachi itmar. Am Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina. My time is Rabbi Yochanan. Aliba d'Rabbanan. What's Rabbi Yochanan's logic according to the Rabbanan? So the Gemara says, Kiddushin demidaita is actually an interesting idea over here. Kiddushin, which only occurs with the das of the girl, demidaita aviha velohi. Only her father could receive it, but not her. Now, at first glance, that statement sounds totally counterintuitive. If it's her das, then it should be her. Look at Rashi, demidaita. Last wide line, demidaita, debainan das hamakne. In Kiddushin, you require das makne, which means in order to affect Kiddushin, so remember again, the husband has to have das, and the woman entering into the marriage has to have das as well. Now, it's not only the woman. In other words, what has to happen is someone on the woman's side, representing the woman's interests, has to have das. So Rashi says, Avia levelohi, Shatara zichsa lo avag. So we'll say, remember, so when it comes in general to a girl, either a katana or a nara, the father, bless you, the Torah has given the father the rights over the daughter. So therefore, again, when it comes to Kiddushin, where it requires das of the Isha, so to speak, so that das is therefore, again, that right is given to the father. However, look at the rest of Rashi. Aval Gerushin Shieshna. Oh, so actually, let's read the Gemara. However, I'm sorry. Kiddushin demidaita. So Kiddushin, which requires das, avi avalohi. So remember, because her father is given rights over her, the das, so to speak, is given to her father, and therefore Kiddushin could only be received by the father. However, Gerushin, the Balkarcha, but I will say divorce, which could occur against the das, in other words, or without the das. Gerushin does not require das of the Isha. Therefore, again, in that case, Bein hi ubein aviha. That, therefore, again, either she or her father could go ahead and receive the get. So the Gemara says, fine. So we'll say that's Rabbi Yochanan's logic. So the Gemara says, Hare Maimer. What about Maimer? Right, what about Maimer? So again, as we spoke about yesterday, so remember again, Maimer is Kiddushin in a Yibum scenario, where again, remember, Reuven's married to Rachel, Reuven dies without children, he leaves behind the widow, Rachel, right? He also leaves behind the brother. So Rachel does Yibum with Shimon, the surviving brother. Shimon gives her money. The money is ostensibly there to affect Kiddushin, even though, again, remember, Yibum doesn't require Kiddushin. All Yibum requires is Bia. But that's called Maimer. What about Maimer? Daita. So we'll say Maimer could only occur with the das of the woman. V'katani ben hi ben avia. And yet again, the Brisa says that either she or her father can receive the Maimer money. So you see from here that even when something needs das, it could be affected either by the girl or her father. Hassam b'Maimer de Bal Karcha. That case actually talking about a case interesting about Maimer Bal Karcha. Both say, what's Maimer Bal Karcha? Maimer Bal Karcha is where the Yavam throws the money, it lands in her lap. That's Maimer Bal Karcha. The Rebbe, and that reflects the view of Rebbe, Disanya Osa Maimer B'Yivimto Shalomi Daita. If a Yavam does Maimer with the Yavama, Shalomi Daita, without her knowledge, without her consent. So what's the halacha? Rebbe Omer Kana. Rebbe says ultimately it works. The Chum say lo Kana. The Chum say it does not work. My time with the Rebbe. What's Rebbe's logic? Gamar mi Bia. He learns that from Bia. To my mi Bia di Yavama. Ma Bia di Yavama Bal Karcha. So I'll say an interesting detail by Yibum is that technically speaking, at least according to Rebbe, that there's the concept ultimately that Yibum works even Bal Karcha to affect Yibum. That Bia works even Bal Karcha to affect Yibum. So therefore Rebbe will say, just like Bia works Bal Karcha, so to Maimer will work Bal Karcha as well. The Rabbanan will say, Yalfilam B'Kiddushin. We learn out from Kiddushin, regular Kiddushin. Ma Kiddushin demidaita, just like it will say Stam Kiddushin, right? You can't be Makadesh woman against her will, right? So just like Kiddushin normally requires das, so to Maimer requires das as well. But my kamifki, so what's at the root of this machlokes? Rebbe Savar Mili Diyavama Miyavama. So I'll say Rebbe's logic is we should learn out concepts of Yivama, of Yibum, from other concepts of Yibum, namely, so in other words, let's learn out Maimer, which is a concept of Yibum, from Bia, which is another aspect of Yibum, and say just like Bia works Bal Karcha, Maimer will work Bal Karcha. So the Gemara Rabbanan Savri Kiddushin make Kiddushin Havayim. Rabbanan say no. Let's learn out Kiddushin from Kiddushin. Maimer is a form of Kiddushin, so learn out Maimer, which is a form of Kiddushin, from regular Kiddushin, which is Kiddushin. So the Gemara says Hachanami. Mistabra Hachanami Mistabra Kid Kometaris Rabbi Yochanan. So the Gemara says Midiktani Seifa. Look at the end of the Brisa. Masha Enkin B'Kiddushin. This doesn't apply to Kiddushin. In other words, even though Maimer could work Bal Karcha, at the end of the day that might be true by Maimer, but doesn't apply by other cases of Kiddushin. Ela Neima to have it to the Reish Lakish. So Rabbi say this should go ahead and refute the position of Reish Lakish. Amalach Reish Lakish Hamani. Whose opinion is this? Rabbi Huda. Rabbi Huda he the Amar in Shtei Yadayim Zochos Ka'achos. This refers. This is Rabbi Huda back on Mem Gimel on the base. So Rabbi Huda who holds that Allah Lamaisa Anara Mu'urasa. Only her father could acquire kesef kiddushin on her behalf. She cannot, because two hands cannot have the same acquisitory power. Rabbi Yehuda, if it's Rabbi Yehuda, Masha Enkein B'Kiddushin, then the Brisa shouldn't say this is not the case by Kiddushin. Rather, what should it say? Masha Enkein B'Gerushin Mibaile. It should say this is not the case by Gerushin. Because remember, Rabbi Yehuda's statement was on get, was not on Kiddushin. So to which the Gemara says, Enachinami, you're right. Aidi the Tana Maimer, the Dami Kiddushin, since we're talking about Maimer, which is comparable to Kiddushin, Tana Nami Masha Enkim Bi Kiddushin. So therefore, again, the Brisa used the phrase that this is not the normal case in regular Kiddushin. I've Rabbi Yehuda Maishna Maimer. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, why is Maimer different? So the Gemara says, Hoil Buzekuka Va'omedes. So Maimer is different, I will say, because remember, as opposed to, now here's what was interesting. So as opposed to Gerushin, where Rabbi Yehuda argues, right? And Rabbi Yehuda holds that a girl, the Nara, cannot acquire the get on her own. Rather, only her father has the ability to do so. Why does he hold that by Maimer, the Nara can acquire it? Why does he say? To which the Gemara makes a very simple distinction. The Gemara says, we'll say by Maimer, remember, we'll say Maimer is not required, right? Again, remember, what's her status before Maimer? What's her status before Maimer? Zika. What's your status after Maimer? Zika. So in other words, by Maimer, what Maimer does, what does Maimer essentially do? Maimer essentially does is really, it precludes the other brothers from doing Yibum. It kind of like, it establishes that the brother who did Maimer is the brother who's going to execute on the Yibum. But halachically, from a halachic perspective, it doesn't really change things all that much. So therefore, again, Rabbi Yehuda will say like this, Rabbi Yehuda Maishna Maimer, so why is Maimer different? Hoil uzekuka va'omedes. Because Lamaisa, again, there's already a Zeka. There's already a Zeka. Hashta the Asas Lahachi. So therefore, again, because there's already a Zeka, Rabbi Yehuda would say, even the Nara herself has the ability to go ahead and receive the Maimer. Hashta the Asas Lahachi, but now that you've mentioned this, Rabbi Yochanan Nami lo tikshul chamekara. So Rabbi Yochanan also, there shouldn't be a kash on him. Why? Shiny Maimer, hoil uzekuko va'omedes. Because I will say, again, maybe what we're essentially saying is that Maimer is just going to be so fundamentally different. Because as opposed to regular Kiddushin, where what? There's no relationship, and now you're creating relationship. Maimer is not like that, right? What does Maimer do? What does Maimer do? Maimer simply kind of takes an existing relationship and maybe formalizes it a bit more, but doesn't really affect any dramatic level of change. So the Gemara says as follows: Tanan ha'ish mekadesh es bito kishihinara bo'u b'shlucho. So let's listen to this interesting Gemara. A man has the ability. Now it doesn't mean, of course, that a man is being mekadesh his daughter. What it means is a man has the ability to effect kiddushin on behalf of his daughter when she is a nara bo'u b'shlucho. So we'll say, let's take a stam case. You have a father. We'll call him Avram. Avram has a daughter, Rachel. So now Avram wants to effect Kiddushin for his daughter Rachel, whether she's a Ketana or she's a Nara. So he could do it either himself or he could appoint a Shaliach to go ahead and do this. Fine. So the Gemara says, Bo b'shlucho. Now the Gemara makes a diak on this. Bo b'shlucho in, ba b'shlucha lo. Now I will say, what do you see from here? You see from here that halacha l'maisa, he could do it. He could do it either himself, right, or with his shaliach, but not through her or her shaliach, right? Not through her or her shaliach. So I will say, what do you see from here? You see from here that halacha l'maisa, a girl cannot receive her kiddushin. Right? A girl cannot receive her kiddushin. So I will say, so remember again, this is a refutation ultimately, again, according to Reish Lakish, to the Reish Lakish. So we'll say now why? Because Reish Lakish said the same way that there's a machlokes by Gittin, there's also a machlokes by Kiddushin. So according to Reish Lakish, there is an opinion that holds that a Nara could receive her own Kiddushin. Now the Gemara is saying, again, a father could effect Kiddushin himself, either through himself or through a Shaliach. That's how it could be affected. What can you infer from that? But not through the girl or through her shaliach, which means the Gemara seems to be saying there's no tzad to say that a nara could receive her own kiddushin. That refutes the position of Reish Lakish. I will say, by the way, there's a lot of back and forth here. We're going to do the halacha l'mais in just a few moments, just to walk away with a principle. We'll say first wide line. Amr l'cha Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish said, Ha nami, so Reish Lakish will say it's not a refutation. Ha nami Rabbi Huda. No, that reflects the view of Rabbi Huda. Because also remember again, Rabbi Huda is of the opinion that halacha l'maisa, the machlokes. Yeah, that's Rabbi Huda. So the Gemara says, Umi matzes mokmas like Rabbi Huda. I don't understand. Do you have the ability to go ahead and Set it up like Rabbi Huda. After all, Vakatani Seifa. Look at the end of the Brisa. Ha'omer the Isha. His interesting case here. His kachili betamrazu. His kachili bezu. We'll say third wide line. So listen to this. Reuven walks over to Rachel. He gives her a date. Yeah, it's not like a metaphor, like a date, right? A date. Homer the Isha. His kachili betamrazu. Become Kudeshes to me with this date. His kachili bezu. Become Kudeshes to me with this. Now the case over here is Mosai. He's giving her two dates. Now, why is the Gemara using the case of a date? Because a date is something that may or may not be a shava pruta. So what's happening over here is as follows. So imagine the following case. Reuven goes over to Rachel. He says, his kachili betamrazu, become kudeshes to me with this date, gives her a date. And then he says, his kachili bezu. He makes another statement, become kudeshes to me with this date. So we'll say, what's the halacha? So first I'll take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says his kachili, it's almost right across in Rashi. Actually, it is right across in Rashi. His kachili, so what's the halacha? Now both say, so what's the halacha in this case? So the halacha is, as long as one of the dates is worth a pruta, then she's mikudeshes. Now both say, what does that mean? We do not look at the collective value of the dates. We only look at the dates as individuals. So therefore, again, halacha l'maisa, if one of the dates was worth a pruta, then she is mikudeshes. Rashi says, ve'imlav ein mitztarfin l'shava pruta. If not, the dates do not combine to form a shava pruta. Kevan da'amar b'chol chada, his kachili, kol chada havi kiddushin ba'apei nafshayu. Now, both say, watch what's happening over here. You see, the reason why don't the dates combine in this case? Why don't the dates combine? Because he's making two distinct utterances, two distinct statements. His kachili betamrazu, his kachili bezu. When you make two different statements, that's two different acts of Kiddushin. So essentially what he's saying is, here's this date for Kiddushin, here's this date for Kiddushin. Hopefully one of them is Shava Pruta, and therefore she's Mikudeshes. But because they are two separate utterances, the dates do not combine to form a Shava Pruta. So the Gemara says, who's this opinion? Now this is the end of the previous brisa. End of the previous brisa the Gemara just quoted before. So the Gemara says, Mantan is skachi. We'll say, who is the opinion who holds that independent statements do not combine? So we'll say, this is interesting because one could have also made the argument, look, obviously he's giving them together, right? I understand that he's making separate statements, but Lamaisa, it's clear what his intention is, right? What's his intention? To do Kiddushin. So Bepashtos, one could make the argument that as long as the dates combine to form a Shava Pruta, you're good to go. So I'll say, so again, this is a nuanced idea here, that because he's making separate statements, therefore again the two acts, or in this case the two objects, the two dates, do not combine. So man tana hiskachi. Who is the opinion who holds that these independent statements are independent statements and do not combine? So the Gemara says, V'amar Rabbi Shimon he. It's Rabbi Shimon. Because Rabbi Shimon is of the opinion that holds until you make a separate shvuah for each one. I will say, what's that case? Take a look at Rashi. This is actually quite fascinating. It's Rashi, Rabbi Shimon he. Right, Rashi says, Rabbi Shimon Gabi Chamisha Tovin. So first I'll look at the previous Rashi. Mantana Deba'inan Hiskachi V'ilo Amar Hiskachi L'Cholchada El Hiskachi Bezu Ubezu Abinstafi. Now I will say, just want to point out, so what we're learning from this price is like this. When he says Hiskachi Betamrazu, Hiskachi Bezu, two separate statements, and the two dates don't combine to form a Shava, they don't combine. As opposed to, I'll say, had he said Hiskachi Bezu Ubezu. What would happen if he would have said bezu with this one and this one? What would have happened? They combine. So who is the opinion that holds that separate statements create separate realities? So Rashi says over here, Rabbi Shimoni, this is actually fascinating. Gabi chamisha tovin also, tein lanu pikadon sheyesh biyadcha. So also listen to this. Imagine you have a guy Ruvain, right? And five guys come to Ruvain, telling him that he has in his possession something that belongs to them. And Pikadon, they deposited something with him and they're coming to reclaim it back from him. And he says, Va'amar, shvuah she'ein lecha biyadi, lo lecha, v'lo lecha, v'lo lecha, v'lo lecha. So I'll say, now watch this. So again, five people show up at Ruvain's door, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, right? And each of them claiming independently that they deposited an item with Reuven for safekeeping, right? Reuven claims, I don't have it. I don't have any of your pikdonos. I don't have anything. And he says, Shvua, I swear I don't have lo lecha, lo lecha, lo lecha, lo lecha, lo lecha. He uses that phraseology. So I'll say, then what happens? And then it turns out he's a liar. Right, but like not just like a recreational liar. 5 times he lied about all 5 guys. Shabbos says, now the shaila is, what is his shvua liability? Right? What's the shaila? Has he transgressed 5 shvuas, or has he transgressed 1 shvua? So what does it depend on? Rabbi Shimon says it all depends how he went ahead and he phrased it. If he said shvua, I swear that I don't have lo lecha, lo lecha, lo lecha, lo lecha, lo lecha, af lecha, ki lecha, ki lecha. Right? So again, if that's what he says, then it's 1 false shvua. 1 false shvua. If he says shvua lo lecha, shvua lo lecha, shvua lo lecha, then ultimately, again, there's independent liability for each of those shvuas. Very interesting. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Shimon da Amar ad she'amar shvua l'chol echad ve'echad. So the Gemara suggesting, the Gemara wanted to suggest, Reish Lakish wanted to suggest that the end of the brayso was Rabbi Yehuda. But now the Gemara is saying, no, it's not true. The end of the brayso is Rabbi Shimon. V'chitei kul Rabbi Yehuda. Maybe the whole brayso really is Rabbi Yehuda. Ubeprati sarvela Rabbi Shimon. And maybe in this specific area, otherwise, right, of his kachili bezu, maybe he holds like Rabbi Shimon. Umi sarvela. That's not true. Does Rabbi Yehuda really hold like Rabbi Shimon? After all, Vatanya we learned zeha klal, klal ino chayev ela achos. Parat chayiv al kol achas va'achas divrei Rabbi Meir. So we'll say this is the rule. In general, when it comes to liability, right, shvua liability, if you made a general shvua, even if the one shvua had many different parts, like we just saw before, shvua lo lecha, lo lecha, lo lecha, lo lecha. So what's the extent of your liability? Einu chayiv ela achas. You only chayiv once. Parat, however, again, if you specified shvua lo lecha, shvua lo lecha, shvua lo lecha, then chayiv kol achas v'achas. Rabbi Meir. That's Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says no. Shvua lo lecha, lo lecha, lo lecha, lo lecha, chayiv al kol achas v'achas. Wow. So you see, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with that premise, and Rabbi Yehuda says that's not true. Even though you only quote unquote made 1 shvua, but you are chayiv on each independent chelek or offshoot of that shvua. Rabbi Lazar Omer lo lecha, lo lecha, lo lecha, lo lecha, v'lo lecha shvua chayiv al kol achas v'achas. So it's interesting. So Rabbi Lazar says like this. It's an interesting variation here. So we'll say, so look, just to show you what we have. Rabbi Meir says that if you say shvua lo lecha, lo lecha, lo lecha, lo lecha, and you lied to 5 different people, you only chayiv what? Once. Because in essence you made 1 shvua. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, if you say shvua, lo lecha, lo lecha, lo lecha, lo lecha, each lo lecha is its own independent shvua. You're chayiv for each independent one that you lied about. Rabbi Lazar has an interesting idea. He says, if you say shvua, lo lecha, lo lecha, lo lecha, lo lecha, and you lied about all 5, you're only chayiv once. But if you said lo lecha, lo lecha, lo lecha, lo lecha, shvua, then you're chayiv for each one individually. In other words, if you put the shvua, so to speak, at the end, so it's clear that one utterance of shvua covered all of the 5 instances, then einach hinam, you would be chayiv all 5 times. Interesting. Okay. Rabbi Shimon says the olam eino chayiv ad sheyomer shvua lechol echad ve'echad. Rabbi Shimon Rabosai again is of the opinion that holds the only time there is independent liability is when you actually make a separate, distinct shvua for each and every petitioner. So the Gemara says, Ella, so who's the author of the brayso? Ella kul Rabbi Shimon. You're right. Rather, again, the entire brayso ultimately again is Rabbi Shimon or b'shlichus savlak Rabbi Yehuda. And again, in the matter of shlichus, he holds like Rabbi Yehuda. Beautiful. Both say great story over here. Rabbi Asi lo al lebei midrasha. So we'll say, listen to this story. Rabbi Asi didn't go to the base medrash. It happens, right? It happens. Rabbi Asi didn't go to the base medrash. But listen to this story. He found Rabbi Zera. My Amar ha'idna be midrasha. Tell me, I wasn't in base medrash today. What happened in base medrash? Amrle, af ana lo ayil. Rabbi Zera said, oh, I didn't go either. I don't know what's going on over here. Right? But let me say, I didn't go either. Af ana lo ayil. So Rabbi Avin hu da'ayil. But I'll tell you who was. Rabbi Avin was there. Rabbi Avin was there, so let's go ask him what happened in Beis Medrash today. So Va'amar, so listen to this, Rabbi Avin's told us, so Amar, Chavrusa Kula Rabbi Yochanan. So we'll say, Chavrusa means the entire Beis Medrash sided with Rabbi Yochanan. Right? Now we'll say, remember again, let's go back for just a second. Rabbi Yochanan was the opinion who said that by not, remember, we'll say, what are we doing here? What are we doing here? You're like, great question. Right? What are we doing? We'll say, so remember again, all of this is the machlokes that started in yesterday's daf. Some of you may not remember, we had daf yesterday, right? It's a tough slot. So we'll say, so remember, all of this is Rabbi Yochanan. All of this, remember, we started yesterday, Anara Murasa. Nara Murasa, which is a Nara, 12 years old and 6 months, who has Erisin. Right? So now the Shaila is, who has the ability to receive her get, who has the ability to receive her Kiddushin. That's what's going on. Rabbi Yochanan was of the opinion, now the similar there's a machlokes by Gerushin, right? Remember again, Tanakama said, either she or her father could receive her get. Rabbi Huda said only her father could receive her get. So Rabbi Yochanan said the same way there's a machlokes for Gerushin, there is also a machlokes, there's only machlokes by Gerushin, but by Kiddushin, everyone agrees that only the father could receive Kiddushin for a Nara daughter. The Nara daughter cannot receive it herself. That's Rabbi Yochanan. Okay? So the Gemara says, now Reish Lakish, on the other hand, suggested the same way there's a machlokes by Gerushin, there's also a machlokes by Kiddushin. So in this we'll say, so now the showdown for this machlokes was in the Beis Medrash. Now watch this. So what happened? So Rabbi Avin says, Chavrusa Kulak Rabbi Yochanan. The entire Beis Medrash sided with Rabbi Yochanan. Entire Beis Medrash sided with Rabbi Yochanan. V'tzavach Reish Lakish ki kruchya. And Reish Lakish was crowing like a rooster, right, trying to defend his position. V'yatza v'haisa. Most remember again, what's Reish Lakish's position? Reish Lakish's position is whatever's true, ultimately again for Gerushin, is going to be true for Kiddushin, right? Marriage and divorce are halachically two sides of the same coin, right? V'yatza v'haisa, they're juxtaposed in the pasuk. The processes are very much interdependent, so to speak, or very much connected. So I'll say, so Reish Lakish is trying to defend his position, and what happened? The Gemara says, no one paid attention to Reish Lakish. That's what happened in the Beis Medrash. So I will say in the Beis Medrash that day that Rabbi Zera wasn't there, and Rabbi Asi wasn't there. So Rabbi Avin reports, showdown Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. The Beis Medrash sided with Rabbi Yochanan, namely, although there is a machlokes by Gerushin, Tanakama saying that ultimately, again, either the father or the girl could receive the get. Rabbi Huda is saying only the father could receive the get. Everyone agrees by Kiddushin, only the father could receive Kiddushin. So Rabbi saying, now watch this, look how the story ends. It's actually quite fascinating. Rabbi Avin bar Samchu. So we'll say, Rabbi Asi says to Rabbi Zera, listen, is this guy Rabbi Avin, could he be depended on? In other words, we're getting this Beis Medrash intel from him. Neither you or I were there. Is he dependable? Like, is he a dependable source? So Amar Lei in. So it's a great expression. To which Rabbi Zera responds back to Rabbi Asi. He says, yes, Kamin Yama Litignihu. We'll say this is such a great. He is like literally the translation is like from the sea to the frying pan. From the sea to the frying pan. Now, what's the nature of that expression? Take a look at Rashi, second to last line of Rashi. Kimin Yama Litigni. Rashi says, Lo haisa lo shohos shichacha. Bein Sayim, Kishiyatze Beis HaMedrash, Amrli Miyad. As soon as Rabbi Avin left the Beis Medrash, Rabbi Zera says, he said this to me, he told this to me over, Kishola Dagmin Ayam, V'amachvas Nusuna Ala Lases Besocho. The same way, right, that when you catch a fish, what do you want to do? You want to cook it up right after you catch it. So literally, again, from the sea to the frying pan. Like there's an expression, it's a good one, but it's like, Kimin Yama Latigni. It's good. Kimin Yama Latigni. Like from the sea to the frying pan, which represents a certain level of immediacy. So what Rabbi Zera was saying to Rabbi Asi is Rabbi Avin told me this right after he got out of the Beis Medrash, so there was no concern that maybe he forgot or he's remembering something incorrectly. Literally, he gave it to me right when he left the Beis Medrash. Kamin Yama Latigni. Incredible. Ana lo Rabbi Avin Rabbi Chia, v'lo Rabbi Avin bar Kahana, and Rabbi Avin steps. So also Rabbi Nachman says, by the way, the Rabbi Avin over here is not Rabbi Avin Rabbi Chia, it's not Rabbi Avin bar Kahana, it's just plain Rabbi Avin. Okay, so the man who cares? Or is Rabbi Abin? So it's very important. No, it's always important to know who says what. Why? Because we'll say again, what is Gemara? What is so much of Gemara? So much of Gemara is pointing out what appears to be contradictory or contrasting statements. So you have to know which Rabbi Abin we're talking about. Someone just tells us this is Rabbi Abin's stam. Good. Rabbi say, so now what is the halacha? How do we paskin? So Rabbi say the Rambam in Hilchos Kiddushin says as follows. The Rambam says that we paskin that halacha l'maisa forgetting either the nara or her father have the ability to receive the get, which of us means we pass like the Tanakama, right? That's what the Rambam says. He says, "Ger he nara imihigia haget liada or liadavia niskarsha." So by a nara, either the girl herself or her father has the ability to go ahead and receive the get. That's when it comes. That's when it comes ultimately again to Gerushin. What about by Kiddushin? So what's by Kiddushin? We do in fact paskin like Rabbi Yochanan that halacha l'maisa only the father can be makabel the kesef Kiddushin for a nara. That's why paskin. So Kiddushin, only father has the schus to acquire the kesef Kiddushin on behalf of his nara daughter. So either whether a kitana or a nara, only the father. By Gerushin, obviously if she's a kitana, the get's going to go to the father, although it could technically go to the girl under certain circumstances as well. But for Gerushin, ultimately again, either the girl or her father, the nara, or her father. By Kiddushin, only the father. That's ta'alocha. Let's go weiter. Says the Gemara, Boi minei Rava me Rav Nachman. Rava asked the following kasha on Rav Nachman. We'll say Mem Dalad Amud Beis. Nara ma'ushate aseh shliach lekabel gita miyad baila. What's an interesting case here? Can a nara make a shliach to go ahead and receive the get from her husband? So we'll say, so now, what have we just established? We've established that halacha l'maisa, a nara has the ability to receive her own get. Now, the truth is, maybe I should wait a little bit. We've established that as a fact, as halacha l'maisa. Truth is, the Gemara hasn't yet. So in the Gemara's mind, so to speak, in the Gemara's process, this is still an open-ended question to a degree, right? But assuming that you hold that a nara does have the ability to makabel her get, the follow-up question, and Rashi himself says it. Rashi says nara. Look at top Rashi Dalam Beis nara. The rabbanim da ami mekabela says gita ma'ushate ase acher shliach lekabel gita b'chaye avia. So we'll say, so according to the rabbanim who hold that a nara does have the ability to go ahead and be makabel her own get. What's the follow-up question? Can she appoint a shaliach? Right? Can she go ahead and appoint a shaliach? So we'll say, so what's the shaila? Second line down, 44b. On one hand, kiyad avia damya. So do we see that? Look, the hand of the nara is like the hand of her father, right? Oh, kichotzra avia damya. So we'll say this is fascinating. Or maybe we look at the yad of a nara like what? Like the chotzer of her father. In other words, maybe the Rabbanan's reason why a nara could go ahead and acquire her own get is why? Because essentially her hand is like her father's chotzer. Remember again, could a person acquire a get through their chotzer? Yeah, we spent a significant amount of time on that. So Rabbi says, this is so fascinating. So this is obviously on the Rabbanan, right? So according to the Rabbanan, who hold that a nara does have the ability to receive her own get, what are the mechanics of that? Do we say her hand is like her father's hand? Or do we say her hand is like her father's chotzer? So watch this. Kiyada via damya. So do we see that her hand is like her father's hand? Ma'avia mashishliach. If that's the case, just as her father has the ability to appoint a shaliach, afhinami mashishliach. So too again, the girl could also appoint a shaliach. Okay. Odoma. The other possibility is kichotzra via damya. So what's the other possibility? Is that no, her hand maybe is like her father's chotzer, and therefore what? The ad dematya gita liyada lo magarsha. Well, say if that's the case, that her hand is like her father's chotzer, then what? She couldn't appoint a shaliach to go ahead and receive the get, because ultimately, again, she's not going to be divorced until the get actually reaches her hand. So the Gemara says as follows. Good. The Gemara says, I don't understand. Was Rava really mesupak if the girl's hand is like her father's hand or like a chotzer? The Gemara says, Umi mesafkalei l'Rava ha. Was Rava at all mesupak about this? Vama Rava said, Kasav get v'nasna biyad avda. So we'll say back to our Gittin days, if a husband wrote a get for his wife, and he placed the get in the hand of her eved, that was, remember again, what's the status of an eved? Eved Kanani, what's the status of an eved? karka, right? Karka. So an eved, so maybe this is like putting it in her chutzner. So the Gemara says, it depends. Yashin mishamarto, if the eved is asleep, and the wife is there, quote unquote, guarding him, harei get, then it works. Because that's considered to be a chutzner. Neir, if the eved is awake, ain't get. Ultimately, again, it's not a valid get. Why not? Neir amai ain't get. Why not? Dahav yalei chutzner mishtamer shelo ladaita. Because, so to speak, is what we call a chutzner mishtamer shelo ladaita. What does it mean chutzner mishtamer shelo ladaita? That at the end of the day, the Eved, when he is awake, acts of his own volition, right? In other words, he does his own thing. So because of that, remember again, the concept of a chutzner is an area that is under the complete control of the owner. When the Eved is awake, as much as he is owned by the Isha, Lemaisa again, it's not Ledaita, it's Ledaito. And therefore, again, the get won't work. And if you hold that the girl's hand is like the chutzner of her father, kimata gita liada nami lo tigarish. If that's the case, also that even when the get gets to her hand, she still shouldn't be divorced. Why? Because I will say her hand should also be like a chutzner she'ena mishtameres, a non-guarded chutzner. Rather, I will say, going back, it is clear that the hand of a Nara is like the hand of her father. So I will say, this is very interesting. You see, we'll pause here for just a second. At least I think all of us thought that when the Rabbanan said that a girl, a Nara, could receive her own get. So B'Pashtus, I think we all thought that, what's the logic of that? She's a Nara. She's a semi-autonomous, right, adult, and therefore she has the ability to acquire it on her behalf. We'll say you see now that that's not actually the mechanics of it. The mechanics of it is that according to the Rabbanon, her yad is like an extension of her father's yad. So really, as a nara, her father has to receive the get on her behalf. It's just according to the Rabbanon, ultimately again, her yad is the status of her father's yad, as an extension of her father's yad. Fascinating. In any event, what the Gemara says is, clearly that's how her yad is working. Her yad is not a chutzner, her yad is an extension of her father's. So we'll say, so now, let's go back to our original question. What was our original question? What was our original question on the top of the Amud? What's the question? Can she appoint a shaliach to receive the get on her behalf? Right? So now that we've established that her yad is an extension of her father's yad, does she have the ability to appoint a shaliach or not? And this is the shayla. Is her hand as strong as her father's hand? Namely, just as her father has the ability to appoint the shaliach, so does she, right? Olo, or not? Or not? That's the question. Amrle ein osa shliach. So we'll say, he said, ultimately again, a nara does not have the ability to appoint a shaliach to receive her get. Okay, so Eisvei, the Gemara raises the kasha, Ketana Shamris Kabeligiti, if a Ketana says to someone, go ahead and receive my get on my behalf, Eino get Adshiagia get liada. So we'll say Ketana can't appoint the Shaliach. Right? In general, a Katan, a Ketana doesn't have the ability to appoint the Shaliach. So if a Ketana, right, wants to get divorced, and she says to someone, go receive my get from me, it doesn't work. What could you infer from this? Ha Nara, Hareze get. So I both say, if the Bryce is telling me that it doesn't work by a Ketana, I could infer from that what? That it does work by a Nara. To which the Gemara says, no. What's the case here? B'she'ein la'av. We're talking about a case where there's no father in the picture. Okay, so if there's no father in the picture, I will say, then what? Remember, once there's no father, a Nara is a totally autonomous entity. So the Gemara says, here's the problem with that. Look at the end of the Brisa. Im Amr Aviyat say the Kabel get labiti. If the father says, well, the end of the Brisa talks about a father. If the father says, go and receive a get for my daughter, Im Ratza balach zarbo lo yachzar. So we'll say, so remember again, if the father appoints a shaliach to go ahead and receive the get on behalf of his daughter, once the husband gives the get to that shaliach, the husband can no longer renege, right? Because that becomes essentially a shliach lekabbalah, right? So that's it. He can't renege. Now we'll say, now it's talking michlal. So we'll say it's talking about a case of a father. So if the seifa of the brisa is talking about a case where there's a father, mechlal dereisha b'diyesh la'avaskinon. B'pashtos, it sounds like the beginning of the brisa is also talking about a case where there's a father. To which the Gemara says, okay, chisuri mechsura v'hachi katani. We're missing a part. Here's how you have to read it. Kitana she'amra hiskabel legiti. If a kitana said, go ahead and receive my get, right? It says a kitana wanting to appoint a shaliach. Eino get ad shiagia get liada. Ultimately, again, it's not a valid get until the get reaches her hand. Ha-nara, hareze a get. But if it was a nara, she can appoint a shaliach, it sounds like. Medran Murim, when is that so? Kishe'in la'av. A nara could appoint a shaliach, I will say when? When there's no father in the picture. If her father's not alive. Aval yesh la'av, but if she has a father, v'amar aviyah say v'kibal labiti gita, and a father appoints a shaliach to go ahead and receive the get of his daughter, v'rotze bal lachzar, and then the husband wants to renege after going ahead and receiving after the shaliach receives the get, lo yachzar. Ultimately, again, he doesn't have the ability to go ahead and renege. So we'll say, how do we paskin in this case? So, right, what do we do over here? So we'll say, the Rambam says, Ein osenara murasa shliach l'kabagita miyad baila b'chaye aviha. So again, the Rambam paskins in halacha l'maisa, when you have an ara murasa with a living father, she doesn't have the right to appoint a shaliach. That's how the Rambam paskins halacha l'maisa. So again, why? Her hand is like her father's hand, but it's limited in its own personal acquisitory abilities. She doesn't have the ability to go and appoint the shaliach. Incredible. We'll say let's go a little bit right. So we'll say, so again, I just want to point out, we have some really good nuggets here today, right? So halacha l'maisa, piece number one is that ultimately, again, by a nara, either she or her father have the ability to receive her get. That's halacha number one. Halacha number two, by kiddushin of a nara, only the father has the ability to receive the kiddushin. Of course, presupposing that there's a father. And halacha l'maisa, when you have an nara murasa, ultimately, again, she doesn't have the ability to go ahead and, what if a nara murasa wants to receive a get and I really should have done this out of order. Right? Let's go backwards. Kiddushin. Who has the ability to receive kesef kiddushin of a nara? Who has the ability to do that? Only father. Okay. Now, in divorce, who has the ability to receive the get of a nara murasa? Either father or daughter. But the limitation of a daughter, but the distinction between a father and a daughter is that whereas the father has the ability to appoint a shaliach to receive the get on behalf of his daughter, and by the way, once the husband gives the get to that shaliach, the husband can't renege. The daughter doesn't have the ability to appoint a shaliach, right? Even though she could receive the get herself, she doesn't have the ability to appoint a shaliach. So we'll say solid pieces of halacha l'maisa. Good. Let's go a little bit weiter. We have another minute. So Gemara says, Itmar. So I'll say this is an interesting case. All right, I'll mention it, then we'll pick up with this in Meretz Hashem tomorrow. It's a shorter daf tomorrow. Yeah, good. So we'll at least begin this. Well, it's fascinating. What happens if you have, kids these days, they're very precocious. So you have a ketana who got married without the das of her father, right? Happens, right? So the nice again, right? So she accepted kiddushin without the das of her father. So we'll say, so the shaila is, what is the status ultimately again of this kiddushin? So the Gemara says, Amar Shmuel, tzricha get, tzricha miyun. So Shmuel says she needs a get and she needs miyun. Now we'll say, now this is actually quite. Now remember, a get is a get. Now we'll say generally, when does miyun come up? Only in cases, ultimately, again, of where the mother and the brother are marrying off, right? Remember, again, miyun just means refusal. Refusal, saying, I don't want this marriage, generally only works by rabbinic marriage, not by biblical marriage. So she needs to get, she needs to, I will say, stop over for today. This is actually a great case. We'll pick up the answer with this. I will say, what a wonderful way to start the new year together. Baruch Hashem, shkayach, everyone. All right, Chevron Zoom, have a great day, everyone.